Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Harker with Brownfield Ag News, and my guest today is Ben Feldman, the Executive Director of the Farmers Market Coalition, talking to us during this very special week to celebrate farmers markets. Now, a lot of us who go to farmers markets celebrate them every time we go, but this is a special week, and you guys have a lot to celebrate. Ben, tell us what some of the highlights are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting to be on the show with you today and have an opportunity to talk about National Farmers Market Week, which, as you said, for us, every week is Farmers Market Week, but this is a particularly special week highlighting all the wonderful things that farmers markets do for communities, for farmers, and for shoppers. In particular, this year, we're talking about how farmers markets are essential. We were talking about that last year, and when we were talking about that last year, that in particular was around the role farmers markets play, but even more so, making sure that farmers markets were among the essential services and were able to continue operating and making sure that people had access to food and farmers had access to their livelihood. This year, we're talking about farmers markets as essential in terms of everything that they do for communities. That message about farmers markets being essential infrastructure has largely been heard, but it's still an important message that that farmers markets are essential because of everything that they do for farmers, right? We now know that our latest estimate is over $2 billion in sales that come through farmers markets every year. We also know that in the course of the last year, over $50 million in food assistance has come through farmers markets. So that's the SNAP and the WIC program, making sure that low-income shoppers are able to afford food. And farmers markets are essential for their communities. In many places, they're community hubs, an opportunity for people to come together and meet their neighbors and be with their community. So that's really our focus within National Farmers Market Week this year, and just a wonderful way to celebrate, as I said, everything that farmers markets do for folks.
Well, the pandemic obviously put a big dent in the supply chain overall. People found out in the grocery store there were shortages. Farmers markets, would you say, had an advantage during the pandemic for being able to meet the needs of consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. You raise a really important point in that when the wholesale supply channels were stretched and in some cases heavily strained, people, in many cases, new shoppers turned to the farmers market to get things that they were having a hard time finding in their grocery stores. And so the farmers market was a place that people were looking. And in many cases, farmers markets got new shoppers. Some research that was done as part of the local food system response to COVID, funded by USDA, that we were a part of, indicated that about 3% of the population found farmers markets, which may sound like a small number, but out of over 300 million people, that's a lot of new shoppers at farmers markets and a big boost for us. And the research suggests about 30% of those people think that they're going to continue shopping. So, as challenging as COVID was, that's certainly a positive. Now, I will say that for our members, and most of our members are what we call farmers market operators, the organizations and individuals who plan, manage, and execute farmers markets. It was particularly challenging, and part of that was because they had to incur additional costs, whether that was staff time to manage customer flow, new equipment, some cases hand washing stations or other customer or crowd control equipment. In some cases, they were, exploring either drive-through markets or online markets. So increased costs at the same time that their income was declining because either the market was limited on the types of vendors that they could have or the number of vendors that they could have in their space. They had to space them out further. So most of our members had reduced hours or days and really struggled. And we are, obviously concerned about what that means in the long term. In many cases, they had to dip into their financial reserves. So during National Farmers Market Week, we're really trying to highlight the important role that those organizations and individuals, market operators, play in facilitating this incredible work, encouraging people to shop their market, bring a friend, but also to donate to these organizations who are running farmers markets in their communities, because they are as we said, essential infrastructure, and without them, that $2+ billion in food sales and 50 million in food access programs goes away. So very, very much an important piece for our members.
Should there be more resources poured into, let's say, from the government or other sources besides donations to really ensure that farmers markets can meet the needs as time goes on in light of potentially another pandemic?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and something that we have been advocating for since the beginning of the pandemic. And many of the programs, especially as they rolled out initially, were not sized or scaled appropriately for market operators, or there were just omissions. So, for example, the initial rollout of the Paycheck Protection Program was limited on the nonprofit side to 501c3 nonprofits. Now, more than half of the organizations that run farmers markets that are nonprofits are not 501c3 nonprofits, right? They're 501c4s, 5s, and 6s. So it's just a little example of the way in which the rollout of these programs was incredibly challenging. Now, that, as a specific example, has been resolved, but we're also about to move into the next farm bill and the negotiations around the next farm bill. And so we're certainly advocating for additional resources for farmers markets, notably under some of the existing programs that already are in place, to figure out how they can better support communities and those smaller market organizations. Many of the people and organizations who are running markets are doing so with pretty limited resources, and going through a federal grant application, especially that requires a 25% matching funds, may not be realistic for them. So we're definitely working with our membership to come up with a set of priorities around that as we move into the Farm Bill.
Let's have you talk about the consumer aspect. What do consumers love? What are they demanding from their farmers markets? What are some of the things that you're able to give them, and maybe challenges that still exist?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's incredible about the farmers market is that connection that customers are able to make directly with the farmer or the person who is making and growing their food. And that's something that, particularly in today's modern food system, there's really almost no other place that you can get that. And that's part of what makes the farmers market so unique, and part of why people are so excited to shop at the farmers market and end up with such a positive experience, is because they can ask questions about the unusual variety that they're seeing, or they can ask for cooking tips or growing practices. And really, in many ways, it might be one of the few places where people from urban communities and rural communities are coming together and having conversations. And so customers are excited about that. And as I mentioned, farmers market shoppers tend to be people who self-select to be interested in food and agriculture. And so they're seeking out those unusual varieties. One of the things that they're demanding of us is more variety of product, and markets are always continuing to add that. As farmers markets have grown and expanded, some of the ways in which they've grown and expanded is by diversifying product. So bringing in meats and dairy and grains and other products besides just the fruits and vegetables that everybody associates with farmers markets and that are so delicious at the market. And then another big piece that customers are demanding is really like more time and more days. So one of the main things that we've seen in the development of farmers markets over the last 10 to 20 years is longer seasons, winter markets. And that, of course, is facilitated by farmers who are putting in hoop houses or other season extenders, storage for their root vegetables, and other things that they can do to make sure that they have product to sell at the farmers market year round to meet that customer demand. So definitely really, really wonderful to see the way farmers markets are changing and growing, and again, meeting the demands of their communities.
Farmers are able to grow, pandemic or not. So what do you project as the maybe demand growth for farmers market in the future? Is it only an upward trajectory? And did you see any losses during the pandemic in terms of markets struggling to not make it?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely markets that that closed during the pandemic that we won't reopen, and we're going to see a lasting effect of it because, you know, as I mentioned, markets had less income, more costs, and either they may have been dipping into their financial reserves or they didn't have them to begin with. But it, you know, in doing so, that means that they're less well equipped to weather whatever financial challenge comes next. So it's definitely a challenging place for farmers markets to be.
And do you expect, though, that if they get more government help, that we will see more farmers markets if they get more support?
Absolutely. The demand for farmers markets and communities continues to grow. And the challenge, of course, is adequately growing that customer base. We definitely see from our farmers who sell at farmers markets, sometimes talking about whether or not there might be too many markets and the challenge of having to go to multiple markets to make the same amount of money that they did previously. So I think that one of the big questions is, how do we continue to grow farmers markets in a way that is sustainable for the farmers and doesn't overtax them? And ultimately that comes down to building the customer base and continuing to build that customer base, which is why events like National Farmers Market Week are so important, to continue to spread the word about why farmers markets are so important. And so, as you mentioned, you know, additional support from government sources, and additional support from communities. Sometimes we see cities really excited about the idea of getting a farmers market started, but you know, realistically, it does take time and an investment in order to get them going. And because of all of the things that they do for communities, we feel strongly that that is an important role for city and municipal governments.
And how many markets are part of your coalition?
So we have just over 1,300 members. Each of those members, most of those members, I should say, are organizations that run farmers markets, and they might run as many as 50 markets in a couple of cases of some of the larger organizations, all the way down to organizations that run one market. So on average, we've got about 3 markets being run by our members. So at any given time, our membership covers about 4,000 to 5,000 farmers markets.
Very good. I've been talking with Ben Feldman, Executive Director of the Farmers Market Coalition. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it.